Movement to advocate for the independence of Tigray. This is an organization that is nonpartisan, beyond party lines. It is a vision for a peaceful, free, and democratic, inclusive, innovative Tigray. Congratulations to the organization as well. We have chapters in the US, and now we have a chapter in London, as well as in Tigray. And that's a huge success and accomplishment. If you'd like more information or you'd like to join the organization, there is a website. It is www.VIT.Tigray.org. So VIT.Tigray.org. So please take a look at this collective movement, a voice for an independent Tigray. Before we start our program, we will take a moment of silence for our martyrs. As you know, more than 600,000, up to 1 million civilians were killed in the Tigray Genocide. Dozens and dozens of documented massacres occurred. There's still been no justice for any of these people, any of our brothers and sisters. We know people were bound and tossed in the Tigray River to die and came up on the other side in Sudan. Just very tragic things, nuns, kids, children, innocent people. So let's just take a moment of silence for those we know, the family members that we know, those that we don't know. Let's just take a minute and remember them. As you all know, it's been 5 years since the most recent genocide in Tigray occurred. I lost 13 family members in this genocide, including my grandmother's sister, Mama Nagasti. So I know we all have those stories. And so condolences to everyone who's reliving that and that trauma that's being relived every time we talk about what happened. But the other side of that story is our ancestors live on when we talk about them, and we honor their spirit and who they were. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that clip. Today's guest is very special. As you all know, when the war on Tigray began, it was young people who led the fight here in the diaspora, who led the fight to be a voice for the people of Tigray, to advocate for the phones to be reconnected, to advocate for aid to continue or resume, or just for the fair treatment of our families. We were the voice here in the diaspora, and it was especially young people. Today's guest is Hiab Teshome. I'm very excited to bring her on. She's an Ivy League educated Tigrayti who studies and works, and her work focuses on public health, social justice. She's an advocate for all marginalized people. I've been studying her recently just for this conversation, and I'm so impressed about her work that goes beyond Tigray, but especially her work in advocating for Tigray and being active and uplifting the voices of our families in our darkest days. So welcome, Hiab. If you could just take a moment and share just a little bit about yourself and who you are, so we can get to know you.
Hi, hello. I'm Hiab. Thank you for that really kind introduction and for allowing me to come to this space. I'm currently at the University of Michigan, studying my MD PhD, and my PhD is in maternal health, specifically in like sub-Saharan Africa and in African American populations. And yeah, I plan to become a family medicine doctor and hopefully work in Tigray after.
Amazing. And you also graduated from UPenn, right? That's where my daughter's currently in school at UPenn. So really great school. And we're really proud of you guys and your accomplishments. Hiab, it's been 5 years since the start of the genocide. And even though we've successfully seen a silence of the guns, we know that there is still low-level warfare that's happening on our families. We remember those sleepless nights advocating all day for our families, and then we're up all night waiting for more news or the most recent updates to know what's happening on the ground. We still don't truly know the impact and how many people were killed. The estimates are very vast, from 600,000 to 1 million, but in either case, it's a tremendous number of people. And we know we still have displacement and starvation and lack of resources and those things. Talk about what you remember in the early days of the genocide.
Yeah, I think in the early days, there was a lot of confusion as well as feelings of hopelessness and disappointment. I think we still see it today, the fact that people don't talk about Tigray. People don't say it. It was never in the news, and there were multiple reasons for why it wasn't in the news or no one would believe or talk about it. So it kind of felt like you were speaking into a void when you would speak about what was happening, which definitely I think affected, the ability to advocate. So sometimes it would feel like, you couldn't make any sort of difference, but it was making a difference. Every one person who knew about what was happening in Tigray would go and talk to someone else. And that was what, organizing is and what generating a movement is being able to be in conversation with people and have people understand. And so I think there were multiple things. And I think in addition to all the sadness and feelings of hopelessness, there was also, a lot of work that was being done and a lot of camaraderie and working together. People were coming together across many different age groups, across different, the whole world, the United States, also in Europe and Canada, were coming together because there was a central, goal and a central mission, which was a free Tigray and a Tigray that was free of genocide. And so in addition to that feelings of despair and that disappointment of, having to fight back so hard, there was also a lot of like co-working and working together to make a difference. And that was, beautiful in a sea of despair and sadness, I think.
Absolutely. You said something really important. You said there was a central goal and a central mission. And so it was easier for people to organize and gather around because it was clear and everyone had the same end goal. I think that's important in the context of today's conversation that we're going to have. Um, you know, there's still no journalists allowed in Tigray, and there's still many active groups, many that are far more active than I am, even at this point, who are doing really good work in their wherever they live in this world, but here in the United States where I am. And the conversations are continuing with lawmakers. And the one thing that I say when people ask me, um, isn't it over? Isn't the genocide over? And, everything's, back to normal. And I always say, until you allow free and unfettered access, especially for journalists, international journalists, it's not over because you have something to hide. And that's how you'll know that we truly are that the genocide is quote unquote over, when you actually have access and people can come in and report on what is happening, and we don't have to smother out information in the different ways that we do. And Tagato have done a really great job. Excuse me. We know all the UN mandates have expired. We know that 80% of the Tigrayan economy is still collapsed. We know that there's renewed talks of war that will play out in Tigray. Tigray will be the battlefield, even if we're not a central cause of this new war that's coming. There's a lot of fear. What should we be focused on right now? You talked about we had a central goal, we had a central mission before. What should we be focused on right now, or what are you focused on right now in your work with Tigray?
I think there's two parts to this like question, which is like the immediate and also the future. So right now, immediately, we understand that the conditions are nothing has changed. And the horrificness of peace deal is like what you said, which is that people believe some like it's ended and people believe that there isn't a genocide, but that isn't true. The genocide has just manifested in different ways and in horrific ways. We know what's happened to the women, boys, and girls and children, the sexual and gender-based violence. We know what's happened to the healthcare systems. We know about the constant starvation that's existing. And so there's the immediate goal, which is that unfettered humanitarian access and being able to provide access and food and supplies to keep people alive, and give them their basic necessities, which is, I think, the immediate like need that is necessary for our families to stay alive in these horrific conditions. And then there's the secondary goal, which I think is like the long-term end goal, which is self-determination and independence for Tigray. And I think some of the questions that we need to start asking ourselves is, we understand that these systems like the UN, like the World Health Organization, the United States are not here for us. They operate on their own interests. And we've seen how across the world, not just in Tigray, but in Palestine and in Sudan and Congo, how these systems actually uplift and are complicit in genocide. So I think reframing conversations to be more so about what are we going to do as people to build movements across, not just like what's happening in Tigray, but what's happening everywhere else, this rise of fascism that's occurring. So questions like, what are we going to do together to make sure that it's not just, looking to these systems that have played massive roles and have been complicit, but oh, free Tigray that is determined for the people and by this people. What does that look like for us? How will we continue to ensure that this never happens again to our families as well as to families and peoples across the world? And I think those are harder questions to answer. And I think those are so much more difficult, but how we get closer to that is by continuing to be in communication and in community with one another and constantly talking to one another beyond, these political frameworks and these frameworks that are meant to make sure that we argue and fight and inbreak amongst one another. We can't let that happen. And our end goal is a free Tigray in which the people can determine what happens to their country and how do we get closer to that goal, I think are the questions that we need to answer. And that's a much difficult question, I think.
And we're going to talk more about what liberation looks like at the end of your presentation. I know you have a formal presentation. Um, Speaking of these international organizations, we know that really it's been called everything but a genocide. I mean, we know that all of the human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the New Lines Institute, various governments, the US government has passed resolutions, the UK, the European Parliament, several organizations, notable organizations have said crimes against humanity and all of these things, all up and right up against genocide, but there's this fear of calling it a genocide. Why is that designation important in your opinion? Or is it important? And do we need that designation in order to move forward? I think that as a community, we've gotten stuck. We're sort of stuck in the mud right now because we feel like if that recognition isn't there, it's difficult for us to keep moving forward. And in some ways, I get that because it's a validation. It's a validation of our experience and what we encountered. And in other ways, there's a legal ramification and there's a world sort of response that's required, even post genocide, even if that's just acknowledgement and how they support in the rebuilding or that kind of thing. Is it important? There was a gathering to commemorate the 5 years in DC last week. It's a great group of people. SJT and ECDC organized that, among other organizations, Omna Tigray. And there was a big conversation around, do we need to focus on a genocide determination? So I'm just curious what your thoughts are around that designation. Is it important? And is it what we're focused on right now, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think I understand, and I think it's a really difficult question to ask. And I know that different people have different thoughts of this. And I think what I look to is prior examples of like what genocide determination has looked like, right? We saw things like for Rwanda and for the Holocaust, even. It's something that's important because, as you said, right, it validates that this was something that was real and something that was happened and recognized by the international community. However, that process takes years. That process takes, a lot of like legal work and it's important, but the question is, do we have time for that? Do we think that we have time to allow what is happening to continue to happen and wait for international recognition in order to do something? In my opinion, we don't. It is something that is important, but it's something that we can look to as like a future goal, something that will take a long time. But we don't need validation from the international community nor recognition from the bodies that have been complicit in this genocide in order for us to, organize and in order for us to make a difference for the people and for our families. It is an important thing to do, and it's an important thing to focus on, like as an end goal and something that is important to put on like a list of like, what is the things that we are fighting for. But there are things immediately that like need to happen. And if recognition from these bodies takes priority over that. It is, like you said, it puts us in a place where we are waiting for others to do something when we ourselves have the power to do something through collective action and through, building communities and through sharing the world, sharing what is happening, and by making people, feel like this is like a movement that is important to them. And that cross solidarity. Those are the things that are important. Those are the things that can materially change the conditions of the people of Tigray right now. But things like the genocide determination, which is important for the future, it's not changing the material conditions right now. And so that is just like my opinion, but it's a very, I think, tricky and difficult thing to navigate, because after experiencing so much, that's what you want. You want the validation that this is something that's real, especially when for 5 years you've been told that this isn't something that's real. But I think the questions that I like to center around and to center like thinking and framing is like, what will change things right now for the people of Tigray? And a name like genocide won't do that. It's what can we do here, and reframing it so as the power lies with us and for the people of Tigray rather than these bodies.
That makes sense. So I know you have a presentation, so I'm going to ask our tech people in the background to give you sharing ability, or to be able to share your screen. And we'll give you the floor so you can take us through the genocide, how we got here, and steps to liberation.
Yeah, and so just a little introduction to the presentation is this kind of is laying out the different ways in which genocide has occurred in Tigray. We know that there was multiple things that were used, and the central theme to all of this is that this was a very deliberate attempt by the Ethiopian forces to commit genocide. And so I'm going to share this PowerPoint, just go through it, and it also includes some of the data that was collected from the commission. So I'm going to share my screen. Can folks see the screen?
Yes, Hiab.
Great,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you. So I want to start by centralizing us in this. We all know that this is not the first time that this has happened to the Tigrayan people. For as long as the Ethiopian Empire has existed, Tigrayans have been perceived as a threat to centralized rulers, and they have been known to resist suppression and subjugation. We know that this is a central tenet to the people, that the people will continue to resist. Thus, all of Ethiopia's authoritarian rulers who have sought centralized control have employed policies aimed at weakening Tigrayan social, economic, and political structures, as well as to committing atrocities to subjugate the people of Tigray. And that is currently what we have been seeing for the past 5 years in this act of genocide, is again an attempt by the Ethiopian Empire to control and eliminate the people of Tigray. So I wanted to start a little bit with kind of recounting everything that has happened up until this point, and the different ways of which this genocide has manifested. And as we know, mass killings and the concentration camps have been a massive component of this genocide. Like Miliet said in the beginning, we don't even know what the number of Tigrayans have been who've been killed. What has been estimated is between 800,000 to 1 million Tigrayans, which is a horrific number, and it's so difficult to even conceptualize. We know that massacres have occurred throughout the entire regions, and it's not just, the mass killings, but it's also the disrespect of human life, in that the Ethiopian forces and Eritrean forces would not allow Tigrayans to bury their dead. There were mass graves throughout the entire region. And it's not just the mass killings, but also the widespread arrests and concentration camps that are existing throughout Ethiopia in order to target and to torture the Tigrayan people. And so I've included some quotes from survivors, such as they were taking them barefoot and killing them in front of their mothers. And so I included this quote in specific because it's not just the physical manifestations of genocide, but also the psychological and social destruction of genocide. And I also included another quote from a survivor in a concentration camp, where the investigators and commanders were hurling dehumanizing and hateful insults, telling them that Tigrayans should not rejoice, but mourn, cancers and threats to be eradicated. And so this shows this dehumanization of the Tigrayan people, and this recognition that Tigrayans aren't worthy of life, which is one of the central core tenets of genocide. And as we know, the sexual and gender-based violence has been one of the tenets of this genocide, where we saw widespread sexual and gender-based violence, not just amongst women, but also girls and boys. The estimated number is 120,000, but I think we all know that that is a gross underestimate for many reasons, such as the inability to go in and actually collect data, as well as the stigma that comes around naming that this is something that has happened to people. And what we do know is that the youngest was under 2 years old and the oldest was over 80, which is horrific and hard to even imagine. And the why we know that this is weaponized sexual and gender-based violence because of the use of sexual and gender-based violence in order to eliminate the population. And there was many ways that this was shown, such as when women were purposely given HIV by invading forces to stop them from having Tigrayan children. When soldiers would place objects such as shrapnel and nails and plastics to torture women, but also to stop their reproductive abilities. The women would report that they were told that they were being raped to change their identity, to Amharize them, or force them to leave their Tigrayan status, and that they were told that they were there to cleanse them and cleanse of their bloodline. In the commission inquiry that occurred, they did a minor scale survey or a large scale survey of 481,000 respondents. And from those surveys and from those interviews, what they saw was that 59.5% of surveyed women and girls, and again, this isn't even including the boys who were also experiencing sexual and gender-based violence, over half of them, 59.5%, experienced at least one form of gender-based violence. And around 58.4% of survivors reported sexual violence and 53.1% reported rape. And so this has been, I think, one of the more horrific and one of the key tenets of this genocide has been the use of sexual and gender-based violence as a way and as a means to commit genocide and to eliminate the population. And so I think it's important that when we talk about the genocide, because there is so little actual information coming from Tigray because of the lack of journalists, because of the lack of, news media about what is happening, to actually talk and hear from the people of Tigray what they are saying is happening. And so I want to read some of the quotes from some of the women of things that have happened to them, because I think it's important that we always center ourselves in the survivors. And so some of the things that have been collected in the commission, as well as in other news reports, are things like women saying that they used an iron rod, which is used to clean their gun, to burn me and left pieces of metal in my womb. They said that you are agame, disgusting and backwards, and this is what you deserve. They said if you were a male, we would kill you, but girls, we can make Amhara babies. They raped me one after the other. I don't know if they realized I was pregnant. I don't know if they realized I was a person. He raped me while the other 3 waited outside. He took my virginity and then left. And then the other 3 men also raped me. They kept me there for 3 days in that house and continued to rape me. And I wanted to include this because there's not a lot of quotes from the people themselves. And I think it is important that in every time we speak about Tigray, that we say what they are saying. We also know that in addition to the sexual and gender-based violence, weaponized starvation has also been used across the country in order to kill the people. The entire region is experiencing famine for the past 5 years, and we know that thousands have died of starvation and that 2 million are at risk of starvation. And it's not just the inability to buy food or to get food from markets, but it was also the very purposeful destruction of livestock and farms to starve the people into submission, knowing that most of the population are subsistence farmers. We also know that very little humanitarian aid and food supplies have entered the country as the Ethiopian government continues to have a humanitarian aid blockade. In addition, we know that 2 years ago in 2023, the World Food Program and USAID pulled out of Tigray due to claims of corruption that were never investigated. And the World Food Program began to bring aid, but it's been quite inadequate and incredibly slow, and has not provided any real change in terms of food access for the people of Tigray. Again, in order to censure the people of Tigray and to actually hear from them what is happening, I wanted to include this clip, and so I'll play.
People here where they are gathering are taking holy waters. As you know that the federal government with the Eritrean troops as they blockade the humanitarian aid accesses, that the people have nothing to eat. So they are trying at least they are just drinking the holy water will feed their stomachs.
So the reason I chose this clip is one, because it's one of the few pieces of video evidence about what the hunger crisis has looked like in Tigray. But it's also the way that the people are doing anything in order to stop this feeling of hunger, which is an all-consuming feeling. And the thing about weaponized starvation and the thing about mass starvation like this is that it is not just the feeling of hunger, but it's also the psychological and mental toll and the way that it affects entire communities and the long-term generational impacts that starvation has on a population. We also know that the displacement crisis has been quite horrific. We know that there are over 70,000 refugees who were able to escape into Sudan, where they are currently living horrific and experiencing a second genocide and lack of aid and food security and housing insecurity. We know that there are 2.5 million people who are internally displaced within Ethiopia, within Ethiopian Tigray, as Eritrean and Amhara forces were ethnically cleansing Tigray and have forced Tigrayans to leave their home. We know that there's been a violent reincorporation of Western Tigray into Amhara and is now under the illegal control of the Amhara regional government, such that Tigrayans are told that they will be killed or forced to claim Eritrean or Amhara identity. And this is clearly, as we understand it to be, as very clear signs of ethnic cleansing. And this also includes the inability to speak Tigrinya in these areas of Western Tigray, as well as forcing Tigrayans who have decided to stay there to hold Amhara national identity cards. Those who escaped and became internally displaced are now living in horrific conditions in IDP camps, which are overcrowded, filled with diseases, and conditions are deteriorating. Which leads me to my next clip of from one of the IDP camps, showing how terrible the conditions are there.
ክሳብ ሕጂ ንፀንሕ ይበልና ነዝሚርና ክንገርም ኢና ዝበልና 3 ዓመት ሙሉእ ብኽፍኣትን ብሽግርን እዩ ክረምቲ መፀት ክትበሃል ከላ ተቆርኒ ኢለ ከምዚ ኢለ ዝኸርብ
ክንደይ ሓሚሙ ደቂሱ ዘሎ ሕዚ ኣባይ ድ ኣብታ ኸይዳ ክንደይ ተዓፂፉ ዝኒሄ ተዓፂፉ
ብብድዕን ትምክሕትን ተስፋሕፋሕቲ ሓይልታት ኣምሓራ ዝጀመረ ዘይዛሪ ጉዕዞ ተመዛበልቲ ዞባ ምዕራብ ትግራይ ተፈጥሮኣውን ሰብ ሰራሕን ፀገማት ተወሲኽዎ መዓልታዊ ሞት ሕማም ስቅያት መግለፂ እዞም ማዓስከራት ካብ ምዃን ሓሊፉ ህዝቢ ከም ህዝቢ ኣብ ከቢድ ሓደጋ ብርሰት ወዲቑ ከም ዝርከብ እዩ ዝግለጽ ዘሎ ኣብ ከተማ ሽረ ዝርከቡ 18 መፅለሊ እዞም ተመዛበልቲ ድማ ዝሓመመ ዘይድሕነሎም ዝጠመየ ዳግም ንከይረአ ብሞት ዝፍለየሎም ኮታስ ድምፂ ቃንዛን ህቕታን ዝዓሰሎም መንደራት ተመዛበልቲ ኮይኖም ይርከቡ እዚ ዘይዛሪ ጉዕዞ እዞም ተመዛበልቲ ክሳብ መዓዝ ዝብል ድማ ሕቶ እዞም ወገናት ኮይኑ ሕዚ ኣብ እንርከበሉ ኣብ ከተማ ሽረ ብዝወቕዐ ሓያል ዝናብ ድማ እዞም መዕቀቢ ተመዛበልቲ ዞባ ምዕራብ ትግራይ
And we know that this has not been, it's a couple of months. It's been 5 years in which many of these individuals have lived in these IDP camps with no hope of going back home to where they're from. And so this is something that's very materially can be changed, is, allowing people to return back to their homes. And that's all the people want, is to be able to return homes and return to their farming. And instead, they have been living in these conditions for the past 5 years, inhabitable conditions. We also know that indiscriminate bombings have been used in order to completely destroy Tigray. And we also know that there are foreign influences, of course, who've been contributing to this, such as Israel, Turkey, China, the UAE, and Iran, who have all sent drones to Ethiopian governments that have been used to bomb the people. And we know that there's been indiscriminate bombings that have targeted civilian locations, such as schools and hospitals, towns and playgrounds, markets, and IDP camps. All the hospitals and clinics have been looted or completely destroyed, making healthcare virtually non-existent in the region, which we know is especially necessary considering everything that has happened to target the people through the sexual and gender-based violence, as well as starvation and the lack of aid that's available to treat people, especially in the IDP camps. We know that the universities have been destroyed as a way to put pause and to completely destroy education and the ability for people to learn. We also know that there's been targeting of really important heritage sites in Tigray, such as the oldest mosques and the churches were destroyed and looted, robbing the people of their heritage, as well as these really important symbolic and religious iconography that is important for the people. And so the genocide is not just a genocide in terms of the way that healthcare and food and weaponized sexual and gender-based violence and killings have manifested, but it's also a way to destroy the people in terms of their soul and their culture. And so I put in here a couple of pictures of very important landmarks in Tigray and the way that they were targeted by the Ethiopian and Eritrean forces as a way to commit cultural genocide and wipe out Tigrayan culture. So the first picture is Al Nagash Mosque, which was purposely bombed, and there's before and after. The Martyr Memorials Museum in Mekelle, which I think we all understand to be a really important heritage site, was used as a grounds for Ethiopian forces where they were torturing people and killing people in. And Queen Sheba's palace was also destroyed and bombed. And so, like what was said earlier when we discussed is in 2022, the Pretoria Agreement, or the Cessation of Hostilities Agreement, was signed between the Ethiopian and Tigrayan governments. However, this is nothing more than a fake peace agreement as we know it. The conditions have not changed in Tigray. If anything, things have gotten worse and are now continuing to escalate into further war that will most definitely implicate and put the Tigrayan people under more duress. And it's not just that this fake peace agreement has been put into place, but it's also allowed for the Ethiopian government to continue to destroy Tigray and to tell the world that, you know, peace has been reached in Ethiopia, and while they're continuing to commit genocide. And the international community has just continued to ignore the crisis. And it is not just an act of genocide, but it's also a genocide by attrition. So there are key components of the agreement that has not been held by the Ethiopian government, such as the occupation of Tigray, still by Eritrean and Amhara forces, especially Western Tigray, which has been violently incorporated into Amhara, as well as parts bordering the Eritrean border in southern Tigray. We know that the information on the current conditions here are very few and far in between, and it's under illegal occupation. And there's evidence that still in these regions, active genocide and crimes against humanity are still occurring. We also know that there's continued hostilities in the region and that the Ethiopian government continues to engage in beating the war drum with Tigray and engaging fear-mongering and aggressive rhetoric. We also understand that there are no independent investigations of the genocide that's currently occurring, and that the United Nations, which has been complicit in this genocide and has allowed for this to continue to happen, has failed to put forth resolutions to renew mandates of independent international investigations and monitoring. There's also used to be very minimal aid into Tigray, as well as the continuation of devastating famine and starvations of thousands. There still continues to be a lack of services such as telecommunication and banking services. The healthcare system is completely non-existent or extremely restricted. Ethnic cleansing campaigns continue to occur, especially in Western Tigray. IDPs have not been returned into Tigray, into their home, and continue to be attacked by occupiers. Weaponized rape continues to occur, and we know that concentration camps that continue to torture Tigrayans continue to exist. And so this is all to say that this peace has not been implemented, and instead we know that Abiy Ahmed and the Ethiopian government is preparing for other wars and attacks throughout Ethiopia and Tigray. And so I wanted to also walk through the Commission of Inquiry of the Tigray Genocide and the data collection that has been done in order to supplement some of the things I've been talking about. So the Commission of Inquiry on the Tigray Genocide report studied what actually occurred in Tigray between November 2020 and August 2022 and tried to quantify it in terms of monetary as well as like the land that has been destroyed and just also like very quantifyingly what has happened in Tigray. And so if we look first at the public infrastructure realm to see what has happened, a total of $5 billion worth of destruction has occurred across 5 sectors, which is very hard to even imagine how much destruction that would be, but it's completely obscene. We also understand that the main actors that were responsible, of course, are the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, the Eritrean forces, and the Amhara forces. In terms of specific sectors, the water, sanitation, and hygiene, a total of $1.87 billion have been lost or damaged. The extent of damages are horrific. 71% of rural water schemes have been damaged, 75% of motorized and urban systems, as well as 3.6 million people have lost their ability to have reliable water sources. We all know that this is very intentional destruction that was done in order to completely immobilize the people of Tigray. And what this has led to is waterborne diseases, collapse of irrigation, severe impact on food security, as well as institutional and governance systems heavily disrupted. And so the commission recommended that focusing energies into repairing these systems would transform the ability for the people of Tigray to be able to live in a sustainable way. In terms of transport, $610 million of damage and $858 million worth of losses have occurred to the transportation systems in Tigray, including the destruction of roads and bridges, as well as the very intentional destructions of fleets. This has led to market cutoffs and supply chain collapses, as well as the transport costs soaring. In terms of municipal services, $187.4 million worth of damages and $597.1 million worth of losses, including municipal offices burned and looted, as well as vehicles destroyed. And urban housing and public housing projects have been very heavily affected and targeted. In terms of energy, $668 million worth of damages and $482 million worth of losses. This is mostly manifested through the destruction of transmission lines and distribution networks, as well as wind farms and hydropowers that were really powerful before the genocide and providing energy for the people of Tigray. This has caused long-term blackouts as well as economic paralysis in the region. As we know, it's been very difficult in order to maintain communication services throughout Tigray and has also severely halted electricity-dependent services such as healthcare and education and business and communication. In terms of media and telecom, $63.6 million worth of damages, as well as $262.6 million versus losses. Key affected systems were the Ethiopia Telecom Northern Region, as well as broadcast systems, wireless networks, power equipment, and service vehicles. What this has led to is documentation of the lack of documentation of the human toll of genocide, making it very difficult to document the genocide, as well as killings and injuries, and as well as the direct targeting of journalists, like we said in the beginning, and disappearances among media and telecom staffs. As well as the communication blackout was used as a tool of war and allowed for this genocide to go and continue to undergo under complete blackout. In terms of natural resources and the environment, the total estimated damages and loss is $46.58 billion, and it's across many different environmental structures such as soil and water, forests, wildlife, ecotourism, pollution and waste management, livestock, as well as even fish and bees and crop varieties. The war has caused heavy contamination of soil. 89% of soil samples had toxic chemicals in it, making it impossible to essentially even grow food in this soil. Soil erosion has also taken into effect, and as we know, the people of Tigray are for the most part subsistence farmers, and so by destroying the land, you destroy the ability for the people of Tigray to be able to feed themselves. We know that this is going to cause long-term soil infertility, as well as the deforestation and destruction of wildlife and the collapse of ecosystem balances and loss of biodiversity. In terms of the productive sector and livelihood, This war has caused catastrophic destruction across all productive sectors in Tigray, specifically and especially, like I said before, agriculture and livestock, as well as labor and inputs and finances, leading to a complete system collapse and inability for the people of Tigray to develop an income, produce for themselves, and has led to famine-like conditions as well as incredible displacements. So we know in terms of households that households are experiencing a collapse of income, extreme food shortages, depletion of savings, inability to access markets and jobs. Agricultural wage labor has completely disappeared, especially as we have seen before that the soil itself and the land is inhospitable to agriculture. There's massive unemployment caused by displacement, destruction of farms, and market shutdowns, as well as food security emergencies across the entire region, and deep and persistent poverty expansions, and also very much so, especially occurring in the IDP camps. And this is going to take many, many years to recover household assets, agriculture, livestock, and the rebuilding of financial systems and governmental institutions. And in terms of the loss of social sector, there's been an estimated of $10.86 billion areas being healthcare, social welfare, and community services, as well as cultural heritage and religious institutions being significantly destroyed. And so in conclusion, if we total up just even the monetary value of what has been lost in this genocide, billions and billions and billions of dollars have been lost. And it's not just the money, but it's also the years of development that has been inputted into Tigray has been completely gone, which means that what recovery looks like is going to take years to bring Tigray back to what it was before the genocide. And we understand that this destruction was deliberate and was an attempt to destroy Tigray as a whole and wipe it from the face of the planet. And rebuilding is not just the monetary and engineering and economic rebuilding, but it's also obtaining justice and providing psychosocial support for the people of Tigray. And so I think for me, it's important that we center what does it look like for a truly liberated Tigray. And the things I think about are immediate true ceasefire and actual implementation of the agreements, unfettered and unrestricted humanitarian access, full verified independently verifiable removal of Ethiopian, Eritrean, and Amhara forces, protection of Tigrayan refugees and asylum seekers, release of all political prisoners, the establishment of all telecommunication, internets, as well as news, independent investigations into all war crimes and acts of genocides, which speaks to the naming and official recognition of this as being a genocide, reparations and accountabilities for all war crimes, including and not limited to extrajudicial killings, sexual and gender-based violence, and the use of weaponized starvation. And to me, the most important is an independent Tigray and a self-determination of Tigray. So thank you. That's the end of my presentation. Sharing my screen.
Thank you, Hiab. That was beautiful. I want to invite people to put comments or put questions in the comments if you have any. One of the requests was to have a copy of this presentation. I think it's just beautiful how you consolidated so much, condensed it in a way that's really digestible. So maybe VIT can put this on their website or make it accessible for folks who'd like to look at this later or reference it later for other work that they're doing. There was another comment that was left that said the new estimate by CITG is 286,250 out of 481,201 experience at least one form of gender-based violence. And I think that's an important figure. First, I just want to say something about the Commission of Inquiry on the Tigray Genocide, in that this, I don't know if we call it an institution or this group or this collective, has had to fight to share the true numbers of what actually happened in Tigray, because the government, I don't even know if we call them a government, but the central government wanted to downplay what the actual damage was in Tigray to international partners and people who will help rebuild. And this group has done a really good job of actually documenting and fighting to say, no, it's actually billions of dollars in damage, and here's the true impact of what has happened to us. So I want to give them a shout out for that very hard work that they're doing in order for the truth to be told. And related to that number around gender-based violence, I think a lot of us, at least I was shocked to see the true number, and I still don't know if it's a true number, but an even larger number in terms of the impact of of people who were sexually abused in this war, the gender-based violence. And when we're not talking about just a woman being raped, we're talking about rape factories, hospitals turned into places where women were repeatedly gang raped. So it was the most violent form of rape that you can imagine. So I was doing a little bit of math, and it looks like 3 out of 10 women are reporting that they were sexually assaulted, not just gender-based violence, but actually sexually assaulted or raped. So the numbers are much more staggering than I think we really understand. And so kudos to everyone who's doing the good work. I do want to just briefly talk about just ask you a couple questions, and then we're going to wrap the conversation up. I know it's been a long hour. You talked a lot about what we can control, like focusing on what we can control as opposed to waiting for some foreign government or some whoever NGO to come and save us. And I think that's a really powerful concept to think about. And as a people being able to look at what can we do better, where can we self-correct, what can we, all of those things to protect ourselves. So I'm curious what you think is an easy thing. You gave us the list, of the liberation list, I'll call it, of things that we can do to truly be free. What are things that just on the most basic level we can do? And I'll give you an example. In my example, it's a little bit controversial, and I apologize if I offend anybody, but during this 5-year commemoration that we had in DC, there were some really powerful women there who have been doing work around understanding what has truly happened and supporting women and girls. And there is a sentiment among young women who have been abused, who have been raped, that they can't come forward. For many reasons, we know that culturally and things, but those who have come forward, who are brave enough to say what happened to them, have been called names. And obviously this isn't wide scale, but it's happening. And things like they're being called taraf sha'biya or taraf fanno. And I died inside when I heard this because I wasn't aware. Maybe many of you are not aware, but I feel like as Tagaru, we know what happened to us. We know that this was not something that was chosen. And in any event, and under no circumstances does it make sense. And we should all reject that type of talk. If we hear it anywhere, we should all speak up. It's completely disgusting. So it's an area where we can free ourselves, where we can take control and make sure that we're embracing these women and girls and boys, for that matter, who were abused during this genocide. So I'm always looking for little ways that we as a people can self-correct and take back our power. What do you see? What things do you see in terms of trying to liberate ourselves? What can we do? What's a small step we can take as a people that just the average everyday person can take a hold of?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. There was actually in support of what you just said in the story that you just said, there was actually an article that was released a couple months ago that spoke to this from the women in Tigray, saying that they were afraid to speak out, and also they would get divorces and would be shamed by their communities for experiencing the most horrific thing possible. This was not their fault, and us changing our mentalities around rape and how that affects people, I think is definitely something massive that we can do. I also think something that I have noticed is that the way our community downplays this genocide, and the way that we've talked about it has been using words like conflict and war. That's not what this was. This is genocide, and it still is genocide. And so we ourselves, when we are speaking to people, the most important thing we can do and the most powerful thing that we can do as people is talk to each other and talk to people about what is happening in Tigray. When people ask where we are from, saying Tigray is the most important thing that we can say, and not Ethiopia. We are not Ethiopians. Ethiopia has done this to Tigray and has done this many times. Saying Tigray, letting people ask you, what does that mean? And explaining to people what Tigray is and what Tigray has been through is important, because you have raised the consciousness of one person, and that raising of consciousness of one person allows them to go out there and do something for it. Continuing to call it genocide all the time whenever it's talked about, not a conflict and war is super important. How can we ask for recognition from independent bodies when we ourselves cannot internalize that this thing has happened to us? And that is really difficult because that forces us to confront the devastation that has occurred and, accept that this has been continuing to happen for 5 years, which is unbelievable and devastating. But it's one of the most important things that we can do, especially when we have to. It is unfortunately our job as Tigrayans to go into the world and talk about what is going on to other people who don't know what is going on. And those little things are super important, in addition to all the material things that we can do in terms of donations and contributing to families back home and figuring out ways in which we can provide material things to the people of Tigray, but also the way that we speak about it, the way that we let people know about what is going on. That is half the work of movement building, is being able to say it, that this is something that is happening, and being unafraid to stand there and to be the one Tigrayan in all of these spaces and say what is happening. And it's incredibly scary and difficult, but it is a thing that allows for movements to build and for change to occur.
Yeah, what I like about the Voice for an Independent Tigray is there's a clear goal, and I think that's what happened, or what hurt us once the Pretoria Agreement was signed. The goalpost kept moving. No one was really sure, okay, what's our goal now? Where are we headed? And I think that's what's good about this organization, is there's a clear goal about liberation. And liberation means a lot of things. People automatically go to the political, and because most people are only concerned with who has power and who loses power and who exercises power. But liberation is more than that. It's about being safe. It's about being able to raise your family. It's not being afraid that your own government is going to come and destroy your infrastructure or starve you to death. Liberation is it's about justice. It's about, it's about much more than just political self-determination, even though we know that's where most people go, that's where most people focus, but it's so many more things. Hiab, are there any final last words that you'd like to share, or anything that you would like to add before we begin to close out today?
I just want to say thank you for letting me come into this space. And yeah, I think this has been a long and hard 5 years, and we can't give up. We know what is happening back home and to our families and people, and we cannot give up because what they have experienced has been horrific. And it is our responsibility and our duty to provide in any way possible and to be voices for the people who unfortunately don't have voices. The people are still fighting back. The people are still resisting. They're continuing to protest and they're continuing to fight. And so we should do the same and take power and ground ourselves in that all the time. And so, yeah, thank you so much for letting me be here today and speaking.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. And it's very powerful to see young people take the helm and really lead the conversation and the discussion. So thank you for doing that. Thank you to VIT. I just want everyone to know that the next presentation on diplomacy is scheduled for Saturday, December 6th. Same time as today. So please be sure and tune in for that conversation. One of my favorites, Ato Mesfin, will be leading that conversation. It will be a good one. So please tune in for that. And to close us out, I'd like to invite Professor Berhanu Gabres Gabier to the floor.
Well, thank you, Miliet. Thank you, organizers. Special thanks to Hiab for, of course, was a very illuminating presentation, and was very gratifying actually to see young people coming to the helm, as you said, Miliet. This is a struggle mainly very relevant to the younger generation here. This last genocide on Tigray, I call it as a wake-up call in the 21st century. And I hope that would be the last wake-up call we will ever hear. Because another wake-up call would be even very, very devastating. But we will make this the last wake-up call we will ever hear only if we act together and act resolutely for independence. Um, I'm saying this, by the way, because I think we should be absolutely clear in our mind that the adversaries that we are confronting are out there at our identity. They're out there to destroy our identity. What's at stake now is actually Tigrawayness. Our culture, our history, our demography, our territory are all targeted for destruction and destruction forever. So this is time for us to act together and to act decisively for a historic change in Tigray. The struggle for independent Tigray is, of course, it's a struggle where everyone has to contribute. But again, I would contend that this is especially so for the younger generation. It behooves the younger generation to carry the torch of independence to victory, because tomorrow's Tigray belongs to the younger generation, mainly. And tomorrow's Tigray has but one option, and that's independence. In my view, a sensible analysis of economic and social and political issues must be based on theoretical grounding, empirical analysis, and historical experiences and lessons. VIT, as Miliet tried to say time and again before, VIT bases its struggle for an independent Tigray on these pillars of analysis. The literature on the theory of independence is abound with books, journal articles, offer rich conceptual models and frameworks to guide our thinking about independence. The empirical literature presents a body of evidence on the causes, processes, and determinants of successful independent movements and lessons from failures. History is a powerful educator. Failure to learn from history, especially from our own history, is a sure way of falling into the same pit over and over again. And Tigrayans, we actually should reflect on this very seriously, because perhaps, in my view, we may have failed so miserably on learning from our history, and that may be the reason why repeated genocides have been carried on ourselves. I joined VIT because its vision of independence is not born out of hatred for any people or intention of vengeance on anybody or mere chauvinistic nationalist arrogance. VIT's vision is based on objective, detached analysis of the historical and current realities of Tigray and Tigrayans. VIT uses peaceful means to achieve its vision of independence because it has the people behind it. Join VIT because it has a worthy mission. Join VIT because the struggle for independence needs all of us. It is time to stand for independent Tigray. Thank you so much. I stop here. Thank you.
Dr. Gide.
Hi, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, the Hiab, the presenter, and the moderator, Miliet. You proved the VIT coordinating team right. We always have the belief that the youth should come to the front line. From what you did today, we learned something. You accomplished a lot in just 1 hour. Please get organized independently. The youth work independently because you are creative, and innovative. We need you to lead the movement. The organization of the youth matters a lot in this struggle. So, but I think, Melita, maybe if you can give people the chance to ask a few questions, if there is some burning issues they want to address, that will be great. Otherwise, thank you so much.
Yes, I wasn't sure. I know we went over on time, so I wasn't sure if we could continue. Hiab, are you still available? I'm not sure if she's still in the chat. Oh, she is. Okay, great. There are a couple of questions. I'm just going to go maybe in order because I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them. One of the questions is, what is the biggest obstacle right now to Tigray achieving justice, self-determination, and what concrete steps is VIT as an organization realistically aiming to take in the near future? I don't know if you want to take that, Hiab, or if someone from the VIT team wants to take that. I think Professor Berhane briefly touched on it, but
Yeah, with someone from the VIT
Yeah.
team.
Can you say the question again, Melita? Thanks.
sure. What is the biggest obstacle right now to Tigray achieving justice and self-determination? And what concrete steps is VIT as an organization realistically aiming to take in the near future?
Well, as Hiab said earlier, this is not easy struggle, it's a challenge. So the steps that we are taking is just bringing our people together, building our unity, educate our people so that they can make knowledge-based decisions on what the future Tigray should be. So then once we build the unity and organized people in different areas, like we want the youth to be organized independently so that they can do whatever creative mind they have to advocate for Tigray. So once we have all these components together, then we have task forces assigned in different areas, and diplomacy, and geopolitical analysis, and legal issues. So, for example, one of the obstacles that we have is it's about legality, getting recognition from the international community. What are the challenge, the legal challenge that we have, and what are the opportunities that we have? What legal aspects of the international support us, and what legal aspects of the international challenge us? So identifying those, putting them together, and then once we have that knowledge, once we build that knowledge, then we have to design a strategy, how we can work together, how to resolve those kinds of, tackle those kinds of challenges together. So in the short term, what we are doing is just building our unity, bringing our people together, identifying people who can work, lead the movement. And then once we have that in place, simultaneously, we are just building the knowledge by identifying topics, educating our people, creating awareness. Then the next phase will be how we can, communicate with the international community. How do we inform them? What diplomatic way do we have to, or what legal support do we have at international level? And what should we do? So all those things are in our radar, in our but immediately right now what we are doing is just building the unity, because it's very important. We have to work together. We have to create common understanding on what the Tigray needs. If we don't have common understanding on what we need, and if you don't have what they say is just begin with the end in mind. What is our end goal? We have to know that the end goal is we have to, whether based on historical issues or what happened recently, we have to you know, determine what our goal is. That's why VIT decided, okay, I think the end goal should be independent. Otherwise, we will not live in the same vicious circle. And if we don't deal with this issue, we are just admitting ourselves to subjugation and just cycle of wars and genocide. So we are just building knowledge. Then who decides at the end of the day? It's the people. We don't have the decision power. It's the people who can decide what the future Tigray should be. But as to us, we have to educate them so that they can make informed decision on their future and any other just issues like that. So that's what we are doing. Yeah.
And I'm just going to do two more questions because some of them are similar. But one is, I think it's actually a very good question of why are we doing this? Why are we giving ourselves a reminder of what happened, at the start of the genocide until today? The question, I think Hiab, you can, and I'll support you on this. But the question is why? Why are we going through all of that? Maybe even re-traumatizing ourselves. Why was that important to get to that conversation about liberation?
Yeah, to me, I think it's important to remember what has happened. And I think that it's important that we always use that to ground ourselves in order to think about what a future can look like. I think I said earlier that one of the big things that like I've noticed in our community is that sometimes we forget how bad it was, and we use words like conflict and war that undermines what actually happened as genocide. And I think it's important that we ground ourselves in the horrificness of what has happened because we need to stay united. And I think sometimes we get lost in the politics of it all and like choosing sides and the fracturing of identities. But at the end of the day, in the beginning days when the genocide was starting, that was the most unified we ever were. And that was because we were able to recognize the horribleness of what was happening. And we stood united in a central mission, which was to free the people and to make sure that this did not continue to happen. And I think it is important to remember that and to recenter ourselves in that, because I think that we have been very split. And I think that we'll only make it through and we'll only be able to survive when we are united and when we work together and we remember that at the end of the day, it's the people and what they have suffered that we should be fighting against, and not each other. And so, yeah, it's horrible to relive and remember and to have to keep reliving this right now. But it is important when we think about the future and how we want to orient ourselves, and how we plan to actually like have a movement that brings real change.
And I'll just add to that, there's a term called Sankofa. It's a Ghanaian word, and it basically means to move forward, you have to look back. And I think that as a community, we present superhuman like, which is a problem for Tagaru. It's almost like, well, we can take it, we can handle it, one person kundishihina, or what, all the sayings, all the things that we say. But in order to move forward and be stronger, we have to deal with what we experience, and we have to remember what we experienced. How many times we've learned about the Holocaust. I grew up in the United States, and almost every other year we hear about the Holocaust. And even in trying to stand up for the rights of Palestinian people, we were reminded about the Holocaust. Not to say, to me, those things were not, they were different. They're two different conversations. But the point is, you have to be able to continue to remind people of what happened. We can't continue to be a chin up culture of just take it and move forward, forget about it. Let's just act like nothing happened. Everything's okay. You have to remember. And if you're grounded in that, if your roots are strong, nothing can knock you down in your vision and in your end goal. And so I just think you have to look back in order to move forward. And we have to like let go of this facade of being this like superhuman people, even though we've seen Tagaro do pretty amazing things with very little. And whatever your beliefs are, I say thank God, but whatever your beliefs are, we have to recognize that for things to be different, we have to look back and we have to deal with it. So and also the common messaging. I think looking back at that and talking about the future gives us an opportunity to figure out like, what is our messaging? How can we talk about this? How can we move forward in a way that's productive? Another question is, and maybe this is for VIT, is what steps is VIT taking to ensure that the independent movement reaches critical mass of supporters rather than being driven by only elites or activists? That's a great question. Anyone who wants to take that question on in terms of how do you build critical mass?
Yeah, the critical mass, as I said earlier, right now we are focused on, people who can educate our people. Then we will, our plan is to create chapters in different places, in different areas. Like we have like chapter in Tigray. The chapter in Tigray will work with the grassroots people, with the people at the grassroots level in Tigray. So we have to do it step by step. So first we have to equip ourselves with material, with resources, with the necessary knowledge to convince people on these issues. Like what you said, why are we having this presentation? As you said, it just we have to remind ourselves on what happened. It's based on what happened, then we have to design the strategy on what to do next. So our plan is to have chapters at different levels, and then those chapters will take the responsibility to approach the mass. So, but right now we cannot just do everything at a time. We have to do it step by step. First step is just identifying people who can play a role on this task, and then the next step will be, different. There are different task forces assigned for different purposes. So one of those will be we will have the media and communication team who can strategize that movement to reach out to the mass and educate on different ways. And the other is we are doing interviews on using different media outlets. That's also one way to reach the mass, and educating them. But as I said, we have to do it step by step, because this is not, we cannot move from step 1 to the step 10 just right now. But we have to. And there is another question that says, I think from President Ame, what's your relationship with the independent party registered in Tigray or in Ethiopia? Well, as Miliet said earlier, I think we are non-partisan. We don't have any special tie with any political organization, but our door is open. Any political organization or individual or any person can join us, as long as they believe in the mission and the vision of VIT. That's Independent Tigray. So the party in Tigray is a party that's running for power. We are not for that. We are just advocate. We are advocating Tigray should be free. We are educating our people to make informed decision. We don't have any political power, or we don't contemplate any political power anytime, right now, in the future. Yes, this is advocacy, focused on educating people to make informed decisions. So we don't have any relationship with any party. We are non-partisan. Okay.
That's amazing. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for your time. Thank you, VIT, for organizing the conversation. Thank you, Hiab, for the amazing presentation. And we look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.